Hey devs, April here. Welcome to another Learn with Experts live stream. In this series, I invite folks to deep dive into a particular feature while giving you the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. This channel is all about helping you be the best Appian developer you can be, so make sure you subscribe to never miss new videos or live streams. I have a couple announcements at the end of the stream, so make sure you stick around to the end. Today's stream is all about creating beautiful and easy to use applications. We'll be talking about the different layers of UX, from making sure all the relevant info is on the screen to spicing things up to really wow your end users. We want you to be part of the conversation. So don't be a stranger. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the stream so that we can answer your questions. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to bring out UX Designer 2, Robin Sultan, and Associate Manager of UX, Christine Danzy. Welcome, friends. All right, so I'm going to ask you a question. I'll also throw this to the audience. What is your favorite interface component? So let's do quick intros. Robin, why don't we start with you? Who are you? What's your favorite component? And how'd you get into being a UX designer?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Robin. I've been at Appian for actually 4.5 years. I spent the first 3 and some change in our customer success team building out applications for clients. And while I was doing my role in the consulting there, I realized that I loved building out those front-end designs. I really liked working with our clients to make sure the apps that we're building looked really great, felt really great, really came together in how they looked. And so toward the end of my time in there, I was wondering, how can I do more of that? I really like doing front-end design. How can I, basically turn my career into that? And I then became a user experience designer. And that's where I've been, and I've been having a great time. My favorite component, I feel like it's a tie between two. I do love our card layout because it's so flexible and there's so much that you can do with it. And then, in a similar reason, the side-by-side layout. I feel like those two are very core into building out really great interfaces.
Yeah, I feel like we should call you Robin's side-by-side sister. Also, I feel like when I ask favorite component, I should say no card layout as the answer, because we all love card layout doing UXs. So, okay, Robin, thank you. Christine, I'll pass it over to you. We did have you on a couple months ago, but for anyone who didn't see that one, quick intro. How'd you get into UX? Favorite component?
Yeah. Yes, I'm Christine, and I've been at Appian a little over 8 years now. And similar background to Robin, I started off as a consultant, and then I was a developer for a bit in our engineering department. And during that time, similarly, I realized I had, an interest in design, HCI, and not just building features, but the reasoning for why we build things the way we do and the psychology behind the design of those features. And so that's kind of how I got into UX for myself, and have been loving it ever since. And I get to work with other great designers like Robin. And then in terms of my favorite component, I was also going to say the card layout because it's just so adaptable for different situations, right? But otherwise, I've been really enjoying our, the new features we've added to our top level components, like our card header layout components and things like that, where now you can fix the headers, you can add a background or image behind it, and so you can create more rich UIs. And so that's a fun one to work with when you're starting from the foundation of your screen and then building it from there.
I think saying card header layout is a bit of a cheat against what I was saying, but you know what?
I still get to say it.
I will take it. Okay, great. So the plan for this live stream today, it's called Build from Inspiration, right? And being involved in the world of technology, we're all interacting with our computers, with our phones, and interacting with great interfaces every day. So when you are building an Appian application and you don't have a huge team of UX designers like some other companies might have, well, why don't we look at some great things that are beautiful out there and see how we can build them in Appian? So we're going to look at an example inspiration website and then build up from that and see how close we can get to it. So let's jump into it. Robin, show us what we're working with. Okay, so the Taylor Swift Eras Tour movie site. This is a pretty nice looking interface, I would say, pretty slick, easy to understand what it is that we're going for here. Also, if you click on the location, you can also see it on a nice Google map, which is always a wow factor. So before we even get into that, Christine, what things on this screen do you see that in your mind you're like, oh wow, there's an Appian component that could do that? Or imagining how could I do this in Appian? What stands out to you first?
Yeah. Whenever I'm looking at something for inspiration and trying to recreate it in Appian, I first start looking at it at like a top level, right? So here you might see that we're breaking up the content into like columns, okay, at a certain fixed width column on the left, and then your main contents on the right. At the top level, maybe we're using cards. I'm going to use cards again because they're so great, right? And then, right, if you see those dates of October 19th, Thursday, maybe that's a card wrapper, and then you have columns, and then you'll probably have that main card on the left and then rich text in each column, right? And so it's kind of fun to reverse engineer a screen and figure out, oh yeah, like we have things in Sail and in Appian that I can recreate this myself, right? Maybe that little those little stamps for the times. Okay, maybe I can use tags, or maybe I use cards because we love cards, right? So it's kind of fun to think through what options you have there as you look over the screen.
Yeah, and then Robin, anything else stand out to you? Like, how do we dynamically, add multiple different times that may be different for each location?
Yeah, for sure. So that would then come in more so with your data structure first to make sure that you're set up with, okay, I have all of my locations, and then within each location, I have some, mapping of times that you have available. But the easiest way to basically copy and paste your code without doing that is using a for each loop. We're going to say, in thinking about how I want to structure the data to make a page like this, I would say for each of our locations, I want to display the location off to the right. I want to show any of the 2D showings and all of their times right below it. And for each time, I know that I want to show one component here for that.
All right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, all right, we know our inspiration, our end goal. So let's get started and jumping right into it. Now, before we can make things beautiful, what do we have to do first? We have to make sure we have the data, right? So, where can we start with that, Christine? Like, what do you think is the best place to start when we're doing that?
Well, we got to use our records, right? We have to go to our record type designer, see that we're referencing the right database structure there. And then from there, if we understand the data we're working with, and then we can start applying that to the page with our foundation and then build the UI elements from there.
Okay, sounds good. All right, Robin, can you pull us into our record? We have one already created.
Sure.
That has all of our event information. Let's see. Here we go. All right, so we'll go into that event record. And here's something, it's been out for a little bit, but if you haven't seen it yet, we can actually generate record views right from Record Designer. And it just takes a few seconds and it pulls all the information in for you. So let's go ahead and do that. Great, generate record view. And in just a couple of clicks, and also being able to select the related record data, we're able to say, all right, I want this interface. I wanted to include all this stuff. And yeah, Appian does the work for you. So, I mean, who out there has used generate record view? It's a great starting place for sure, especially when you have a ton of related records, right?
Yeah, I know that this didn't actually come into place, I don't believe, when I was still building applications. So being able to use it now, it's just so great that it's like, oh, this speeds up so much of the process, because your first step to building anything is to just get the data on the page. And the fact that this whole generating record view is doing it for you speeds up the whole process.
Yeah. All right, let's check out what it just made for us. All right, so here's a great starting point. Maybe, Christine, can you just walk through kind of how this is structured and how that generate record view works and gives us a great starting place?
Yeah, so as we can see from here, we have our event data. So we have the name of that event, when it's happening, description of it. So we have the foundation there. And then we have that list of items that we're trying to recreate, from that inspiration. So we have like the show time of that event, times, locations. So it's nice. We already have that data to start from. And then we can kind of start thinking, okay, what's a good way to display this information, working towards that envision inspiration that we have.
Yeah. So yeah, this is great. It's easy to read, we can do with this, but let's do more, right? Let's spice it up. So the next place to start, before we get all the way to cloning exactly what it is out there, what can we use within Appian to help us kind of get a head start when it comes to making a little bit more advanced interfaces? Robin?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few places to look, but already here within Interface Designer, we can obviously see all the components, but maybe you're just looking for an inspiration or you want to use something that already exists. Our second tab here on the palette for patterns will show you a whole list of a bunch of different patterns you can use just using Appian components that we already have. So if you know, hey, I want to use cards as choices, which is a pattern I felt like I used quite often when I was building applications. What these will do is they'll give you like little code snippets of everything kind of pre-populated in there. So you can say, oh, I know what this is supposed to look like. You know, it's all set up. I just have to pass in my own data. So it's really helpful to use these, again, just to be a little bit faster in your development. You know, can I save a little bit of time and not, you know, code all of this myself? Or maybe I want a whole comments thread. Here we go. We already have this here. And sometimes, you know, when you're building your applications, you do have to work really fast to get everything done. And using our patterns that are built in are going to make that just like so much faster.
Yeah, no, the patterns are amazing. And before we had the patterns and had them available right within our palette, we had interface recipes, which do still exist on Docs, but now you can go to design.appian.com, which is a whole site just dedicated to showing you, again, those patterns, those components that exist, but also giving you guidelines, showing you some more inspiration for what's possible. And the great thing about it is it is a really helpful tool for learning, especially some of those more advanced concepts like looping and things like this. So let's jump into using a pattern to start. So Robin, why don't you pull us into an interface where we can get going here?
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this one. Basically, what we did ahead of time is we wanted to map out, again, the same layout here Christina's talking about. You know, we have a picture on the left, we have content on the right. So we did that ahead of time, and I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this so that way we can work in this interface for today.
Beautiful. Yeah. Reuse. Don't retype everything, right? And yeah, so we're going to get started. The one we're going to start with is event timeline detailed, I think. So Christine, can you tell us a little bit about this pattern and why this makes sense to use for what we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah. So what's nice about this pattern is, as it kind of implies in the name, you have specific events and timestamps, right? So we have your main date on the left-hand side there, the times for that date, and then the event itself. And so when we think back to the inspiration page, right, and we're looking at movie times, we have the date of the movie, the time of the movie, and location of the movie. So we can kind of start here and just figure out all the loops and how to show our data. And then from there, we can continue to tweak the arrangement if we need to. But here, at least we have some of that foundation that we can work off from, which is nice about our patterns, right? You don't have to just take it as is, right? You can think about the overall theme that you're working towards and play around with the baseline sail that you're given.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so this, you know, maybe at first glance, you're like, this has nothing to do with movie times, but these patterns, they're pre-populated with rich data so that you can really get a feel for what it could look like. But again, sometimes like, let's pick and choose the parts that make sense for what we're trying to go for. And what's great about the patterns, if you can scroll down, Robin, and show us the code that has been put in, right? We have those sample data, but also within patterns, there are comments that explain, you know, what is this specific thing you're looking for? And we can go in and remove the things we don't need and add the things that we want for our use case. So Robin, why don't you talk us through like what changes you want to make here so that we can get closer to what we're looking for?
Sure. Well, the first thing we're going to want to do is replace the data with what we have already set up. So we ahead of time went and got our data together in local bang event details, where it's going to query all of our data. So if I pop open our right-hand side and look at event details, just to double check our data, we can see that each of these individual items has her location, the address, the times. So if we think back to what I talked about on the actual Taylor Swift page, where I was like, oh, how can we structure our data to be able to build this in Appian? Exactly one to many. Each location has those multiple times. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is actually swap out the data and start just taking away what I know that I don't want. So a lot of this data off to the right, we aren't showing that much detail. So I'm going to go ahead and start taking away and changing the data.
Great. All right. I'll give you a chance to kind of go through some of that a little bit. Christine, can you just, give us some insight into how do you guys come up with these patterns and what do you do to develop them and make sure, all right, these are good to go in the world, right? Because it's your team working on these patterns, right?
Yeah, we have a lot of fun creating these patterns. And essentially, what we try to do is, for lack of a better word, find patterns in the applications that people are building, right? Oh, we notice people are trying to show a list of events. We notice people are creating milestones, right? And so finding these elements that people are recreating for applications and thinking, okay, how can we give them a head start right off the bat, right? If we know people are trying to build these, let's create these patterns for them, right? So like we said, it's an easy way to kickstart this like element that you're trying to create on the page and replace it with your own data. And so first we do that. So we know, okay, we want a list of events. And then we also look for inspiration, right? So we think of other apps we use or other areas where we've seen list of events and find those best practices. Oh, this is how typically it's displayed. Okay, we have event data displayed like this. And so we'll come up with options and then essentially come up with one that we feel like is a good interpretation for our cases. And then we get feedback from other designers, implement that, and then we kind of add it to the product. And so similarly, when we create patterns, we use inspiration, right? That's the whole theme of this session we're having here is working smarter, not harder, right? You don't have to recreate something. You can see how else it's done and apply it for your own use cases.
Yeah. No, thanks for that insight, Christine. And it is true. Like we're not reinventing the wheel all the time. Like let's see what we can make. And also, even now with the design library, we can make them once and have those standards for our applications and add them into the design library where we can drag and drop just like anything else, which is amazing. We did have a live stream all around design library and reusability a few months back. So make sure you head back and check that out if you didn't get a chance to see it. Okay, so with just a couple minutes, Robin already has a great starting point because she pulled in that pattern and changed it from kind of the timeline of events happening that day. And instead on the left-hand side, hey, let's show these different locations. And now on the right-hand side, Robin, tell us what you're doing here for the right-hand side.
Yeah, so it all just kind of started to populate right now. But in looking at the Taylor Swift page and looking at the different show times that we have, the way that all of these are styled, I think Christine had talked about this too when we first looked at the page. My mind immediately goes to a tag component. The tag field that we have allows you, to have a whole bunch of these individual units with automatic wrapping in them. And they're styled actually very similar to what we see on the page. So what I'm doing right now in the code is we have all of our locations here on the left. And now for each of our locations, we want to show those times off and to the right. So I'm adding this tag field in right now. And each show time is going to be its own tag. So it gets its own little for each loop in there.
Beautiful. Yeah, I mean, right? Only a few minutes and already you have this really impressive interface that is a step up from what the record view was able to generate for us. So here are the layers of building out a great user experience. So Christine, what kind of would you do next or think about doing next once you get to this point? Like what is your thought process as you're layering on?
Yeah. So as we talked about, as we build on the layers, we have the data. We're starting to play around with which components we can show that data. And now kind of stepping even farther back into the actual like layout of the page, I might look back at that inspiration and think, okay, so I have my list of dates. I have my list of places. I have my times. Okay, now how else can I kind of rearrange and structure this to work even closer to that end goal we have, right? And building up from that foundation. So it's like you said, building up from that layer, data, stylizing the component and even like working on that top level. And you can work the other way too. Sometimes when I'm building things, I like to start at the high level where I create my columns and my sections and then add the data. But if I'm working from a pattern, I might kind of tweak it as I go.
Okay. That sounds good. And then maybe there's something up on the upper right of Interface Designer that I'm not sure everyone's aware of, but maybe Christine, can you tell us about how we could use that as another layer of building out user experiences?
Yeah. So as you're building out your UI, sometimes you have to think about, okay, how else will my user be interacting with this screen, right? Is this something I want to be mobile friendly, or do I imagine them using it on some tablet? And so what's nice about an interface designer, we have these form factor previews at the top here. And so you'll see we're currently on desktop, but maybe we want to check what it looks like on phone, right? So I can like click these different views, test it out, and realize, okay, maybe I need to do some additional development to make this look good on other formats, right? And Appian automatically will do some stacking and form factoring for you automatically, but there's extra ways in which you can, specify and fine tune that experience even more in Sail.
Yeah. And actually, SAIL, for those of you who don't know, SAIL does stand for a self-assembling interface layer, which is that, hey, let's adapt this for you so it will work on any form factor. It'll look pretty good on any form factor, but we still give you the additional power to say, hey, if I'm on a mobile device, show this instead of this, or stack it this way, right? So if you're building from inspiration and building a mobile app that you know is going to be used out in the field on people's phones, like look at the apps on your phone that you use all the time and take inspiration from there. And you can actually keep Interface Designer in like mobile display mode while you're building so that you can see right as you're going. But it's pretty incredible that you can make an experience across all different form factors without needing to additionally be an iOS developer, Android developer, all that kind of stuff. So, Robin, what about you in terms of, what would you think of doing next as you're adding layers to building out this interface?
Yeah. So, in talking about the environmental form factor of, hey, what size screen are we going to use? I've been keeping this on the wide desktop because I've realized when we are on some of the other sizes, we can see that our text is smushed. So one of the next things that I would do is to make sure that, hey, maybe the width of this image that we have here, maybe it needs to be a little bit smaller, or maybe we need to give more space to the text. In terms of kind of beefing up what we have on the right-hand side to maybe make it look a little bit different, I would say, okay, what's the next thing we want to do? Do we want to show the location of each of these movie theaters? Where would I want to put that? And I would start thinking about how would I want to mirror either what's here on our inspiration site, or say, hey, based on what we have in our current design, what is the best place for that location to show?
Yeah. No, really, really great next steps that we can do. And there is a lot of power within Appian. So, we could go on and talk about this all day and keep building onto it. But actually, Elizabeth Barbietto from my team built out and actually cloned this site ahead of time because we wouldn't have enough time here during the stream. So just to go ahead and show you the power of Appian, I mean, this is pretty darn close, and it is all Appian components, right? So maybe Christine, can you talk through what some of the things here are that are being used?
Yeah. So what's fun is as Robin was building out the screen, she used tags, but as you can see here, the timestamps are using cards, right? So here's that piece where as you're looking at a screen, play around with what might make sense for your purposes, right? And how we can recreate that. So here we're probably using columns and cards and rich text items to build that out, and then using a for each loop to show each item repeated, right? As we talked about, you don't want to have to keep repeating the same thing over and over again. And so if you have like a rule that you can reuse, you design it once and you pass in your data and it apply elsewhere. And then if for some reason you're like, oh, I don't want rounded card corners, right? I want them, non-rounded. You make that update and it'll apply to all your items. And so you can kind of see that here when we were creating it. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah. And Robin, if you could just do some switching back and forth, like again, I just want to remind you all, this is Appian. This is all Sail. And look how close we were able to get to the end product. And a little plug for next week's live stream. If for some reason you can't use an Appian app for your purposes, but you have your data in Appian, you can create Appian web APIs to pull Appian data into other websites that you may be able to get pixel perfect with. But I don't know, I love efficiency, and I would rather get 90% of the way there in, 4 or 5 times faster than have all the little pixel perfectness. And that's really the power of Appian. So I'm gonna give a chance for people in the chat if you have any questions to come out. But I just wanted to ask some questions to you two. So maybe Robin, I'll start with you. What was like the first thing that you learned, or the first thing that unlocked being able to kind of have a jump in the richness or level of your UIs? Like, as a new developer, like, where do I start when I want to get better?
Where do you start? I would say kind of like what we're doing today, like looking at examples. When I first started, I had 2 older developers on the team, one who had been at Appian, I think, for 1 year, the other one for 2 or 3 at that point. So they were really great at mentoring me, where it was, okay, just get the data on the screen first. You kind of worry about how it looks a little bit later. And then it just started to be like, okay, let me see what other teams are doing. Here at Appian, we do design reviews where, Christine and I will actually look at applications now in our current roles. We will look at applications that people have built, and we'll start to give feedback. So one of the things I like to do is actually shadow in those reviews as well, so I can see, hey, what are people doing? Is there a pattern that they're using that I really like? And now that we have the whole, design, the sale design system here, we already have screenshots with inspiration of patterns here. So I think this is a really great starting point for new developers to say, what is possible? Like, how was this done? And starting to kind of question, why was this chosen? Like, how can I use this in my own application? So I really like the inspiration in the sale design system.
Yeah, all about inspiration, working together, collaboration. And I had the thought, like, we have a lot of great stuff in our community discussions, but we should have like a peer design review area of community discussions. Post an interface and be like, hey, what do you guys think? What can I do next? Any feedback? Another great tool in the toolkit for designers, and Christine, maybe you can explain to us how this works, is doing usability testing. Now, I've had the pleasure of getting to do usability testing on up and coming features. So what is usability testing, and how could developers actually use that during their build process to make sure their end users are really happy?
Yeah, usability testing is a great way to validate, have I built the right thing in the way that our users will actually understand, right? So let's say you create a screen with a core piece of functionality, and maybe in your mind, you're like, this is easy, I understand this, right? Well, you might be biased, you built it. So I like to get users and come up with tasks that I know they will typically do with that screen, right? Let's say they're filling out a form, submitting some sort of case, right? So you will ask the user to just talk through and work on those tasks, right? That they're going to do. And it's a think aloud exercise. So it's different, where you want to ask them just like, say whatever you're thinking, right? You're like, oh, is this a button? Do I click this, right? And you kind of hear in their tone, okay, are they understanding the page? Do they know where to go? Sometimes the user will like to ask you questions like, oh, should I click this? Don't answer. Just say, what do you think? Right? It's you really just want to see what feels natural to them, and then as they go through each scenario that you prompt them for, you'll get a sense of, okay, that was easy, or oh, I noticed that was confusing. And those little pieces of feedback will help you understand what you should fix or what worked well, and then you feel a little more confident about what you've designed, or maybe you have some key takeaways and where to improve it. And so it's a nice way to validate, okay, I have built the right thing that our users can understand.
Yeah. And usability testing, right? Or even, when there's a new Appian release and a new feature comes out, like record events, and oh, it feels so familiar. I know Record Designer. This is very easy to configure because it's guiding me along, right? As an end user, if I look at a screen for the first time and I know exactly what I need to do, I feel great. Look at me. I'm a tech expert. But if I look at the screen and I'm confused, I'm like so frustrated, and it doesn't feel good. So yeah, validating with other people, because you know what you want it to do. But if someone comes on without any instruction and can't figure out what they're doing, it's not a great user experience. And this is what we're trying to provide. And also, it just makes yourself look good. And Appian makes it pretty easy to build out things like that. We do have a couple of questions that came into the chat. If we could get back to Robin, your screen, I did want to mention this and I forgot. So I'll just wait a second for your screen to come back up. And if we could go to our version of the branded version. So here it is. So the question, is there a way to develop the map component in the site? Yes, actually. So Robin, if you could click on that address, I did miss mentioning this. One sec. And here it is. Oh my God, it's a map in Appian. So impressive. How do we do this? Well, while the rest of this interface is all out of the box components, we also have an app market, which is rich with plugins. And some of those plugins are component plugins that work just the same as any other interface components that you might have. Robin, if you can go to edit and actually open the palette and then scroll to the bottom. So when you add interface component plugins, they show up right in that palette. You drag and drop them over. You configure them in a low-code way. And wow, suddenly I've integrated Google Maps into my application. So I definitely encourage you to go to the app market and check out what component plugins that we have to offer, because they can add even another wow factor to your interfaces. Yeah, so Stefan said for maps, there are plugins, embed Google Maps and OpenStreetMap. I don't know if he answered that before we started talking about it, so I may have missed that. Anyway, Mike S., who is one of our top community contributors, if you've ever Googled a question, you've probably gotten an answer from him on the discussion forums. Joking, how much are you paying for those design reviews on community? Now, this is the goodwill of the community helping each other, because when Appian looks good, it raises all of us up. And you developers out there, you're the ones who make Appian look good. So it's a win-win-win for all of us out here. Cool. Okay, let's see. I'll wait to see if any other questions come in, but maybe Christine, what is some mental checklist that you go through when you are building, and then also after you build, to make sure, okay, I hit the spots I'm trying to hit?
Yeah. So whenever I'm starting with a UI or some new feature, first, I want to make sure I understand, the feature, understand the data, right? Do I have that information readily available? And then when I'm trying to structure that page, I like to think of it almost like an outline for an essay, right? If I were just writing this screen, how would I organize it, right? What are my main title sections? What are the subtitles within that? And then the descriptions within that page, right? Because similar with an outline, and you're easily able to scan that information, I want that same feeling when you look at a page, right? The user can approach the screen, they can scan the key areas, and they know what it means. They know what each of the sections are. And so that's kind of the goal I like to have when building out a UI, right? So I have my data, I have the structure, the organization makes sense. Okay, now let's lay it out on the screen. Am I giving more importance to certain areas that I know are the main goal of that functionality, and then maybe lesser information is hidden or smaller, right? And that's where I can build up some of that styling, right? So I have the data, now I style it with rich text, or I have cars that show certain information here, and then I start building it up from there. And so main thing is understanding the information and what that user's goal is on the page, so that way I can actually structure the information and style it in the way that makes sense, and highlight things. If we look at this screen as an example, right?
Oh, let's give a second to pull the screen back up. Oh, there we go. All right, go for it.
Yeah. So for instance, I was talking about data and making sure things of importance are pulled up. So here I want to make sure that when I scan the page, I know what day it is and what times are available for that. And so we've highlighted October 19th, and then we've displayed all the content in the same way, right? So it's making sure I can scan that information and have it styled appropriately.
Beautiful. While we're back in Interface Designer, Robin, one thing I wanted to ask you, because we mentioned this when we were planning for the live stream, talking about a component that you worked on that you're really proud of, right? Of event record history. So can you just tell us a little bit about that? And in the theme of building from inspiration, what inspiration did you get? How did you come about doing this?
Yeah, definitely. So if we come down on our interface palette to grids and lists, we now have our event history list. I don't know if anybody who's joining us for the stream has used this yet. But again, just like all of our components and patterns, they're here to make your life easier. We had gotten a lot of asks to have kind of baked in event history, both in collecting the data and showing it. It comes up on pretty much every single project. And so my team and I were very lucky to be able to be the team to actually build out this list component here. And we actually have two styles available for it. We have the one that we're showing here in the preview, and then we also have one that's a bit more like a timeline. I can pull it up here into our interface so we can take a look at it. Oh, it's in the dark background. Okay, I'll pull it out. But anyways, on this, we were thinking about what we wanted to show. All of our event data that we do want to show, it's a history of who did it, when did they do it, and what was the action that they did. And when we were starting to think about the design, we say, okay, we know what it is we want to build. We need to capture these fields. And I went and said, okay, what have I seen in my own life that looks similar to this, or what have others designed? So I went to like social media platforms. I'm like, okay, a lot of these are feed style. If you go on like Twitter, for example, it's literally just a feed of people posting a thing at a specific time. So I looked at how that was structured. Facebook had like an activity history. We looked at what competitors were doing as well to say, okay, can we draw inspiration from these designs? What's going to look the best here in Appian, and kind of match what we have in our system as well. So in kind of looking at everything and putting them together, I was pulling out elements from them, go through a whole design process, and then just like Christine was saying with usability testing, we showed them to Appian developers to say, hey, like we were building out this new component. What are your thoughts? Like, how would you configure this? How would you use this? What would you change to try and come up with what the final design ended up being for the event history list?
Yeah, it is beautiful. I want to make sure people have a chance to view it. So maybe you can pull up the docs link for it, and so we can see all the examples here. And I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is, really powerful with record events, but you can also use it with any structured data, right?
Yes. Yeah. This is a record-backed component. So as long as your data is set up in a record, then you will be able to use it. So we have three different styles. The first two are going to be this list style here, where it has kind of the avatar, who did it, what they did, and where each of these is actually collapsible. So if you have additional comments or notes that you want to show, we do have them available for you to configure. The last version we have is our timeline, and this is actually really cool design. We were really pushing forward first with just the list, but got some feedback while we were doing usability of, oh, what would be really cool is if we could show this in a different way. And we just kind of ran with it. We're like, okay, let's build it. Let's see how it goes. And we started showing more developers in future usability tests. Everybody was like, yeah, like we'll honestly use both. We like both of these layouts that are here. And it's great because, again, this one component is being able to check three different use cases with the different layouts. If you don't have a lot of screen space, maybe you want to use the preview list. If you're putting this on a full page, maybe you want the full list. If it's just a column and it's stuff that doesn't really have comments or notes associated to it, then the timeline is another really good step, another really good choice for you to use. So it's a really cool component that we've added to the library.
I can see how much you're glowing from pride with this, and for good reason. It is beautiful. And another thing that I love about this too is this is something that we've had patterns for, interface recipes to help you get close to this. And now, of course, every release, Appian comes out with stuff to make your life easier. Now here, it's a component that's even easier to configure and set up, makes less line of code, easier to read and for things like that. So Christine, I want to ask you, because here's an example, and I know there's other examples too, of there's multiple options for how it could look, right? There's multiple formats, or maybe we're talking about different colors, sizes, whatever. What tips do you have when you want to be able to test multiple versions of a UI? And then how do you go about deciding which one is the best?
Yeah. So I kind of touched on this a bit, but I think this is a good example to expand upon where this is where if you have like a child rule where you can like test things easily is really helpful, right? So if we had a container for this event list, or even I think itself as the structure, it's easy to like swap the parameter, right? But you can kind of take that pattern if you in your own patterns that you create in interfaces, right? So if I have rule inputs and I have like a color parameter or like a size parameter, and I'm calling that child interface on a page, and I just want to test it out quickly, what it would look like if I change that color or change the sizing and see how it feels. It's a nice way where you can like test it out and see what feels right. And Robin touched upon this other factor as well, where it's really good to understand how it fits within your screen and what else you have working with, right? Like if you already have main content, but then your event history list also is very large and takes up a good amount of space, that doesn't feel right. So you really have to get a balance for what size that component should be in regards to the rest of the things on the screen, and continue to play around with there. And then as we mentioned earlier, right, we have our form factor, testing. And so similarly, how would it look on mobile? How would it look on tablet? And do I need to add more specific dynamic checks to change that styling even on different views, right? Maybe on desktop it makes sense for it to be a certain style, but on phone I actually want it to be a little bigger for bigger click targets or whatever you're building there. So a lot of different factors to keep in mind, but if you create your rules or patterns in a way that are easy to change, then you can conditionally display it that makes sense for that use case that you're working on.
Yeah, that's really, really great tips. And I think also what just comes out of that, like, don't be afraid to play around, try things. You're not going to break it, take some inspiration and clone things that you use. We actually, Robin, if you could switch over to that YouTube tab, Harshit from our community, he did this and made a few different videos of him cloning LinkedIn, YouTube, and even the Appian community website, right? So take some inspiration from this, take some time out and see, okay, how close can I get to cloning this website that I use every single day? We have a couple more comments in the chat that I just wanted to address before we close out here. So Kinjal asked, how long did it take to create the final version of the site? And Elizabeth, who built it and is in the chat, said, with all the data handy and plugins set up beforehand, it took me around 30 minutes. So if Elizabeth was on the stream and not talking and just building, I guess we could have, built this all the way, but we spent a lot of time talking here trying to share some nice information. How can you access the record type used in this video? So this is actually, we just went to that live site and pulled the information from it. So it's a very simple record, just a few fields. But again, you can create records from anything. And if you are using from Inspiration, yeah, just take the data you see there on the page. Also, Kurt mentioned it is also accessible. So maybe Christine, can you just give us a brief thought on accessibility and like the tools Appian gives you to make sure you're not just creating beautiful interfaces, but accessible interfaces? What does that mean?
Yeah. So accessibility, right, means that, we're taking into account maybe the colors we're using, right? Are your colors have good enough contrast when you look at the text? Do you have the right amount of information on your rich text fields for screen readers, right? So if someone's using a screen reader to read the page, is it in a structure and a organization that makes sense? Are they reading things appropriately? And what's nice is on Appian, we also have guidance on our docs for accessibility and different accessible parameters that we have for our components. So you have guidance there. And it talks about like different components that you would use and what extra parameters you might need to add. And so definitely check out that guidance, because not only do you want to be usable from like a user perspective, but also accessibility perspective is important as well. So definitely check out the guidance we have as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really helpful. And another shout out just to our docs team. We have such beautiful, easy to read docs. And this is another kind of plug for next week when we talk about integrations is sometimes you have to read other docs that maybe are not as great. So shout out to the Appian docs team and also the YouTube team, because there we have a YouTube video too. If you don't want to read the page, you can go ahead and watch the video already made. Okay, Robin, I'll give you a chance. Any parting thoughts or last words of inspiration for future UXperts like yourself?
Yeah. I think when designing interfaces, it's really easy to get hung up on, oh, this has to like look a certain way. Like I need it to, match this specifically, or I want to basically make this just look really, really jazzed up. Like it's got a lot of color, it's got a lot of images, it has icons. But actually, when you're, designing interfaces, it's always best to start with, is this functional? Can users actually use this? So if we look at what we built here in the live stream, right now we're already checking boxes. We're able to see dates, locations, and times. So this interface is already great because we can actually use it. So I would say when designing interfaces, always start with making things functional. You want to make sure that things are functional and then kind of work your way up. You want things to be effective. You want things to be intuitive. And then you finally want to think about, okay, how can I enhance this to make it a more beautiful UI? Some of those do have, interchangeably, as we're making this functional, we're also thinking about the way that users are going to work through their interfaces. So when I was mentoring, younger developers when I was a consultant, I'd always say, get your data on the page first, make sure that works, then think about logical groupings. Is there a way we want to group our data together? Maybe, all of our like profile fields, it's like, okay, name, address, phone number, put those together. Maybe you want to have, emergency contacts or something as like another section. So start grouping your information to make it, again, more easy to fill out. And then after that, say, okay, great. Can I enhance this in any way to make this look a little bit nicer? And basically just always making sure that your interfaces are functional before adding in all the extra pizzazz to them.
Yeah, make it work, then make it spice it up, Great. Well, this was a really great live stream. We're all on our way to being UXperts and delivering beautiful experience to our users. So, Robin and Christine, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge today. I really hope to have you back on another live stream soon. And I will head to some announcements before we close out. So, shape the future of Appian's product and offerings with your insights. Take our following survey for a chance to win a free pass to Appian World, certification vouchers, and more. So that's surveymonkey.com/r/2023 Appian Dev Survey. We'll throw that in the chat as well. And it's also available from the homepage of Community. Appian Europe, it's less than a month away on November 15th. If you're in Europe, I really hope to see you there in person. Otherwise, make sure you tune in to our Live Build Challenge live stream. And finally, our next live stream is just 1 week away, next week on October 26th at 11 a.m., which is all about integrations between Appian and external systems. To our lovely audience, thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed the stream, please hit the like button and let us know. And if you have more questions or ideas for future streams, drop a comment below or head over to the Appian community discussion boards. Make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you in the next one.